Tonight, I will be sharing 5 stories. With this being the last video of the year, I figured I'd go all out on finding some of the creepiest stories currently available. I think we have a good collection, and I hope you guys agree. Also, I missed the last upload because apparently Santa thought it would be funny to give me the flu for Christmas. I'm feeling a lot better now though, so I'm glad I get to post at least one more video to close off such a great year. I don't want to ramble on, but thank you guys for making 2019 what it was. I really do mean it. This was a very smooth year for the channel, with new faces every single day. It's been great, and I can't wait to see what's in store for 2020. But I'll get things moving along now. A huge thank you to the incredible authors who allowed this video to be possible. Remember, you can send in your own story to rylhstories@gmail.com. Likes and comments are always appreciated if you enjoy. Subscribing if you're new is of course as well. Enjoy the video, and I hope you all have a great rest of your year. For as long as I can remember, my father has been irrationally afraid of mimes. I've seen him get reduced to a sweating, quivering mess at the mere sight of them. No one knew why this was, as he would always angrily brush it off whenever he was questioned about it, and pretend that they didn't affect him at all. While this had become a running joke in the family, I was always curious about the reason behind this odd little quirk of his. Well, this Christmas, I finally got him to spill the beans, after filling his stomach with copious amounts of cake and wine, and I took his story down, almost word for word, on my phone. It really is something, I can tell you that. You really want to post this on the internet? It sounds extremely unbelievable, so don't be surprised if they accuse you of making all this up, okay? Jeez, where do I even start? So, you know that I came to this country back in the early 90s, right? It was a couple of years before I met and married your mother. Times were tough for someone like me back then. I had to work 2 jobs just to put food on the table and have a roof over my head. Even then, all I could afford was the rattiest apartment in this decrepit old building in a crime-infested shithole of a neighborhood. Like, it was so bad that you couldn't get a good night's sleep without hearing at least one gunshot each night. Just a moldy, crumbling place to live in. Now, a second job was basically a weekend thing, where I worked as a bartender at the local strip club. It was called the Rear End. Hilarious. It was trashy, and not something I'm particularly fond of, but working at a titty club sure beats sleeping on the streets, I can tell you that. What's that? Yeah, your mother knows. We just don't talk about that part of my life. Don't look at me like that. Those women were some of the bravest, most honorable people I've ever known. Anyway, my job meant that I would come back to my apartment late. I mean 2 or 3 a.m. late. I need you to understand how late it would usually get those nights, so you can truly appreciate just how bizarre what I saw in the elevator that day was. It was a Saturday night. I remember it well. I was exhausted, and just wanted to go back to my bedroom as quickly as I could. I got into my building, lumbered over to the elevator, and saw a mime waiting for me there. You know, makeup, white face, blood red lips, striped shirt, the whole shebang. He was holding a string tied to a balloon in one hand, and waving with the other at something in the distance with this weird, lifeless smile plastered on his face, and his hand wasn't moving naturally either. It had this weird robotic or doll-like quality to it, like it was something mechanical, you know? He jerked his hand, left, right, just smiling at something far off into the distance behind me with these wide, unblinking eyes. Oh yeah, there absolutely was just a wall behind me, nothing else, which is what made it so creepy. I mean, I've seen all sorts of strange stuff in this country, but nothing came close to seeing a mime in the elevator of my apartment building at 3:30 in the morning. Needless to say, I was thoroughly creeped out, and decided to take the stairs to my apartment on the 9th floor. I didn't actually have this belly back then. I was in decent shape, so that climb, while tiring, wasn't impossible. Sometimes I would even climb up and down those stairs just to exercise. I guess what I'm trying to say is that I wasn't worried about climbing up all the way to the 9th floor, and so making the decision to use the stairs wasn't very difficult. I think I had reached the 4th or 5th floor when I noticed something moving from the corner of my eye. I paused, turned around, and there he was, climbing the stairs a couple of floors below me. Have you ever seen those old silent films? Ever see a character tiptoe around in an exaggerated manner when they're trying to make it obvious how important silence is? That's how he was walking, with his hands balled up into fists in front of him, and climbing with these freakishly long strides, jumping over multiple steps at a time, only using the tips of his toes to pull himself up. He froze when I saw him, mid-stride, like a statue with one leg suspended in the air, as he stood precariously. I expected him to tip over and fall backwards any second, but he didn't move even an inch. It was like he had turned to stone. Not all of him, however. He had this strange expression on his face, almost this cutesy, "Oops, mommy caught me stealing the cookies again." And his eyes were darting around rapidly, refusing to acknowledge my presence. I was this close to losing my shit, but I steeled my nerves and spoke up. "Hey man, cut it out." I laughed nervously. "You got me, man. Hilarious." I tried to rationalize it to myself that it was nothing but a prank, or a practice performance or something, you know? "I don't have any money, man," I added. "I'm dirt poor, so you can stop now." With that, I picked up my pace and started running upstairs. My blood ran cold as I heard him start moving again, much faster this time, but in the exact same motion. I looked behind me again. He was just one floor below me, again turned into this living statue, but he was so close to me this time I could see the whites of his eyes as he stared off into the distance. It was so bizarre, I didn't even know whether this was all malicious or not, you know? Was this mime trying to hurt me? I think knowing that he was a psycho nut would have made it easier to deal with, but this, it was irrational. The fear I felt was primal, shaking me to my core. I screamed at him. "What do you want?" I shouted at the top of my lungs, not caring who would wake up. No, hoping someone would. "Leave me alone. Screw off." His expression instantly changed at that. He looked sad, almost, but it was frighteningly disingenuous, like he was putting on a show. His face fell, and he brought his hand up to wipe off a non-existent tear. I watched in stunned silence as he then proceeded to climb the railing of the stairs and jump before I could so much as open my mouth. I screamed and quickly bent over the stairs to see what happened. He was sprawled on the ground, 6 floors down, limbs twisted at odd angles and lying in a pool of blood. I must have spent almost a minute just staring at his lifeless body, wondering what had just happened. At the back of my mind, I knew that I had to call the cops or something, but I was far too shocked to even move. It was a tingling sensation in my spine that brought me back to reality. This strange feeling of being watched, like thousands of ants running down your back. I looked up the stairs above me and I kid you not, son, there he was, that mime, looking at his own dead body with this shocked expression on his face. He was holding his cheeks like that Scream painting, and his mouth had dropped open with his eyes threatening to pop out of his sockets. His face was just inches from mine, and I damn near peed my pants. You see my hands right now? Do you see them shaking? Just thinking about that night. Imagine how terrified I must have been back then. My body had just shut down, refusing to move, and we both stood there, like statues, like a fucking living art installation. He was the one who moved. After about half a minute or so of being utterly still, his eyes moved and finally locked onto mine for the first time that night. Shivers ran down my spine as I stared into those deep pits of nothingness. But the spell was broken, and I could move my body again. I stumbled and fell backwards, but quickly scampered off to my feet and ran, and kept running until I left the building, not bothering whether I was still being followed, and doing my hardest to keep away from the body lying on the ground floor. I stayed awake that whole night, grabbing a coffee at the first cafe that opened at the crack of dawn. Of course I anonymously called the cops from a payphone in the morning, and of course there was no body in the building when the cops later showed up. I'm not a very religious man, but I knew that was something logic couldn't explain. For the next week I stayed away from my apartment as much as I could, only going there to shower and or change my clothes. Spending the night at friends' places after making just the weakest excuses imaginable. No, I didn't tell anyone. Are you crazy? Who would believe me? And no, There were no CCTVs in that building. Poverty is cruel, son. I could no longer impose myself on my friends, and I didn't want to go to the homeless shelter, so I decided to go back to sleeping in my apartment. I tried to fool myself into thinking that what I had experienced wasn't real, that I had dreamt it all up, like it was all just a hallucination. But deep within me, I knew that it was real, all of it, and that it would probably happen again. A feeling of tremendous dread washed over me when I stood outside my building 8 nights after I first ran into that mime. It was again pretty late, around the same time when I had ran into him the last time. With a heavy heart, I trudged over to the elevator, trying to avoid thinking about the fear clutching and squeezing my heart. I couldn't even look at the spot where he had fallen, and chose to stay away from it. The elevator opened with a soft ding, and I breathed a sigh in relief to see that it was empty. Why didn't I just take the stairs? Hell fucking no. Too much trauma associated with that place. Better to be cramped inside a fast-moving elevator than risk climbing the stairs and meeting the suicidal mime from hell. I guess I should be thankful that my elevator ride was peaceful. I don't think I would have survived if he would have shown up there. A heart attack would have killed me long before he could slice me up or something. I don't know. I fumbled with my keys, but quickly got in and locked the door behind me. Kicking my shoes off, I immediately ran to the comfort of my blanket and curled up in there, trying hard to fall asleep, but staying awake like an owl. So this apartment was pretty small, right? Just 2 rooms, excluding the bathroom, so you can hear whatever is happening in any corner of the room. You get where I'm going with this? No, he wasn't in the house, but he was outside of it. I heard something rustling around outside my front door and instinctively knew that it was him. At first, I thought I'd just stay there in bed, but the rustling didn't stop. The fear just kept on building inside me, and it was becoming unbearable to just stay there. My heart was beating so fucking fast, I feared it would leap out of my mouth. Screw it, I whispered to myself and got up to investigate. I banged my toe against the foot of the bed and yelped, with the sounds from outside ceasing almost instantly. After controlling my pain, I walked over to the door as softly as I could and looked through the peephole. I whimpered as my fears were confirmed. There he was, that mime, standing with his back to the wall in front of me, at attention, like some damn army cadet. I think he must have sensed me watching him, because as soon as I looked through the peephole, he bent over forwards, such that his upper body was almost parallel to the floor. His blood-red lips stretched into the most vicious smile, and he began to stare right at me. I don't know how, but he was somehow looking straight at me. No, he wasn't anywhere near the peephole, so I don't know how, but I knew he was watching me, watching him. I felt his eyes pierce my very soul, taunting me, letting me know he was playing with me and that he could kill me whenever he wished. He brought his palms up to the side of his face, opened his mouth, and began clicking his tongue. Except I never heard the clicking sound. What I heard was a knock, and my door began to shake. Knock, knock, knock. Short bursts of 3. I fell back in fear. You know, he wasn't near the door, but he still knocked. I don't know what was happening, but I knew I couldn't stay there even for a second. I climbed out of my window and began descending using the iron emergency exit stairs attached to the side of the building. I heard something impossibly large and strong slam against the door to my house as I began to climb down that rickety iron staircase. My door gave in with a painfully loud crunch and I almost fell down. Why didn't anyone come to check what was happening, you ask? Well, people mostly minded their own business. Home invasions, murders, drug deals gone wrong. It could be anything, not necessarily something demonic. At one point on my way down, I considered just jumping and ending my life. I was that terrified, but I shook my head and continued to fight for my survival. I was soon free. I was out of that infernal building and panting and catching my breath on the streets below. I looked back up at where my apartment was and saw for the last time in my life. He was standing on the railing of the emergency stairs, right outside my bedroom, without a care in the world. I don't know how he balanced himself on that thing, but he stood there, staring at me with that messed up smile on his face. He theatrically brought his hands up and clapped. I watched in terrified silence as one by one, the lights in all of the apartments began to be switched on. He was there, in every apartment, at the windows that I could see. Everywhere. He was... Jesus. He was performing. If that makes any sense. In one house, he was miming drinking tea. In another, juggling invisible balls. Just a messed up sight to say the least. But the original one continued to stare at me. And then with another clap, switched off every light in the building and disappeared, leaving me shivering in the darkness. Jesus, Dad. I whispered. Did that really happen? That's up to you. He replied. I know what I saw. So, did you go back there again? I asked. He shook his head furiously. Never in the night. Never again. I moved out as soon as I found another place. What happened to that building? He sighed. I kept tabs on it. The owner had to sell it to a builder. It was just not profitable anymore. A bunch of suicides occurred there. Like 2 to 3 each year for half a decade. Bad omen all around. The new owner tore it down and built a shopping mall there. A shopping mall? Which one? He looked at me blankly. You don't mean... My blood froze as the realization sunk in. But they have a mime performance in the amphitheater there every month. He nodded. Just keep smiling. It was my manager's favorite quote at my latest dead-end job. Happy electronics, where the customer is always right. Even Karen. It wasn't my first choice in employment, but with the holidays coming, I needed some extra cash fast. In my parents' eyes, I'd never be able to compete with my successful siblings and buy them a car. But maybe this year, I can get them a gift card. Hell, maybe even a Jelly of the Month club subscription. Luckily, I wasn't the only smiling employee in the happiest store in New Hampshire. I had a few other colleagues to help collectively pass the time in the Misery Palace. My favorite, of course, was Abby. She helped train me when I first started, and always had some sarcastic remark to brighten my day. It also helped that she was absolutely gorgeous, and my heart rate doubled every time we made eye contact. I'd been working up the courage to ask her out for weeks, but like most opportunities in my life, I was probably going to let this one pass me by, and go play Counter-Strike in my apartment for as long as it takes to forget about it. Then there was Kevin, 5-time Employee of the Month. Kevin. Each monthly portrait, adorning the wall featuring the same stupid look and creepy grin. The guy had to be obsessed with the store, because he took our manager's word to heart. He never stopped smiling. A lady literally screamed at him because one of the keys on her keyboard was sticking, and his face never moved a muscle. Needless to say, we avoided him like a plague, and never invited him out for drinks after closing. This monotony continued for several weeks, each day more boring than the last. Then one night, our manager decided to treat himself to a short shift. That smarmy businessman practically ran out of the door, front flipped into his Volvo, and sped off into the night, probably to go regale some poor girl with stories of his great success and his $2 cologne. This, of course, left me to close up with Kevin. As Abby's shift ended, she headed towards the door and waved goodbye to me. I waved too, while wrapping an invisible noose around my neck and strangling myself. She stifled one of her cute laughs and gave me a wink before closing the door behind her. The next hour passed by with the speed of a snail, and about as much joy as eating one. I did farewell to our last customer of the night, giving one final smile before locking the front door. I spun around and was startled to find Kevin standing right behind me. Jeez, man, I cried out. Don't you knock or something? I could tell he was just as taken aback. His face was more pale than usual. He had bags under his eyes too, like he hadn't slept in days. Sorry, he let out meekly. I didn't mean to surprise you. I just wanted to let you know I'm gonna start cleaning up in the back room. And with a flash of his grinning teeth, he scooted off down the aisle. I sighed and headed towards the closet to grab the broom. After I finished sweeping, I headed to the back of the store to clock out. If I hurried, maybe I could make it home in time to get a few games in with my buddies. After I moved out here away from my family, playing games online was basically the only contact I had with my friends. It was fine with me though. I finally had the solitude I always wanted. As I opened the door to the back room, Kevin was sitting at the table and greeted me with a smile. Damn, dude, the boss is gone. You can drop the smiling act already. Without waiting for his response, I turned and started clocking out on the computer. A process I never looked forward to. A fancy electronics chain, and they've got us using a computer older than my niece. This was when I heard a muffled noise behind me. I glanced behind me and saw Kevin with his head in his hands. Shit, the dude was actually crying. Hey man, I said, immediately regretting my earlier comment. I was just teasing you. You alright? Kevin looked up at me from his hands, tears rolling down his face and into his grinning mouth. This guy had serious issues. I'm sorry, he said between sobs. I don't want to be like this. I don't have a choice. What do you mean? I asked. If you don't like working here, then just quit. Save yourself while you still can. I met him with a half-hearted grin to try and ease the tension. You don't understand. He's always watching. Who? The boss? Hey, I know the guy's a creep, and this is an electronics store, but it's not like he's sitting at home watching the security cameras. No, not him, Kevin said with a cry, his gaunt face lowering towards his hands again. The laughing man, he whispered. A few seconds of silence passed. I didn't know what to say. The laughing man? I finally let out. Here, home, my bedroom, it doesn't matter. He's always there. He won't leave me alone. Hey, if someone's stalking you, you should go to the police. They can... Not someone, he interrupted. Something. He's always there, staring at me. He just wants me to smile. I don't know what he'll do if I stop, but I can't take much more of this. He finished softly. I didn't know what to say. It was like Kevin was having an emotional breakdown. I reached over and put my hand on his shoulder to try and comfort him. Hey man, that sounds crazy. You should really see about getting some help. My brother knows some really good doctors who could... You don't believe me? He interrupted again. Fine, I'll show you. Kevin reached his long fingers towards his face and pressed them against his cheeks, holding his mouth in a straight face. I could see him struggling to keep the expression. Hey man, whatever is going on, you need to try and relax. Is there someone I can call for you? Suddenly I heard shuffling behind me. As I turned around, I found the noise was coming from behind the door. It continued, growing louder and closer. Kevin's face became more contorted by the second, his hands trembling. The shuffling finally reached the door and stopped. A few seconds of silence went by, when suddenly, the door handle started to slowly turn. Kevin let out a scream behind me and I turned to face him. He had released his face and was bearing an excruciating grin. The door handle had stopped turning. What the hell was that? I yelled, but Kevin was inconsolable. I raced towards the door, my outstretched hand grabbing the doorknob, and yanked it open to find... nothing. The store was barren and silent as a graveyard. As I looked around, Kevin stood up behind me. He walked slowly towards me, still forcing a grin. Look, I'm sorry, he said. I shouldn't have said anything. Please, let's just forget this happened. It's better that way. I didn't know what to say. Part of me was hoping this was just Abby or one of the guys playing a prank on me. Go ahead and go home. I'll finish locking up. I slowly nodded and left the store. My hands were shaking as I drove back to my apartment. As I reached my door, I fumbled more times than I'd like to admit, trying to put my key in the lock. Once inside, I locked the door and went straight to bed. Whatever that was that happened at work that night, I decided to confront Kevin about it in the morning. The only problem was Kevin didn't show up for his shift. 30 minutes past the start of Kevin's shift, a manager walked by with less than a smile on his face. I don't care who that guy thinks he is, he said frustratedly, but he doesn't get to no call, no show on me. He continued storming past me and slammed his office door. The boss man's threats didn't seem to faze Kevin though, because he didn't show up at all that day. Or the next. I asked Abby if she or any of the guys had heard from him, but no one knew. It wasn't until my manager heard from the authorities that we found out the truth. Kevin was dead. The funeral came quicker than I thought. We were all invited, even though we barely knew the guy. After all, at Happy Electronics, we're all one happy family. It also seemed like we were Kevin's only family. As far as I could tell, none of his family even showed up for his funeral. I knew because after the closed casket affair, I made a point to talk to as many people at the reception as I could. I had to know what happened to Kevin, and if he had told anyone else about the Laughing Man. I got more than I bargained for when I introduced myself to a man standing outside the reception building, a cigarette smoking down to the filter still in his hand. He said his name was Brad. He'd gone to school with Kevin, and they had still hung out from time to time until recent events. He also had the misfortune of being the one to find Kevin. "I'm sorry, man. I'm sure you guys were close. I didn't mean to pry," I said apologetically. "I've never seen anything like it. I just can't believe someone would do that." "Do what?" I asked, my curiosity getting the better of me. I wish I'd just kept my mouth shut. Brad gazed up at me from behind his next cigarette, his eyes evaluating me before he exhaled a cloud of smoke. The police said it was a break-in, a burglary gone wrong, but no thief would do that. He paused to take another drag from his cigarette. They didn't just strangle him. It was like someone mangled his face. All I see when I close my eyes is his face. It's like he was fucking grinning at me, man. My heart skipped a beat as he stopped speaking. This was all way too much to handle. The next few silent seconds felt like an eternity. "Did Kevin ever say anything to you about the Laughing Man?" I asked hesitantly. "The Laughing Man? What the fuck is that? Some show on Netflix?" I gave him a weak smile. "No, forget I said anything. I'm really sorry for your loss, okay?" I said, and went back inside the reception hall to say my goodbyes. It was another long silent drive before I made it back to my apartment. I hopped online for a bit to try and cool my nerves. When it was finally late, I decided to turn in for the night. As I crawled into bed and turned off my lamp, I pulled the covers up and closed my eyes. After a few seconds, that's when I heard it. A soft chuckle. My eyes shot open as I looked around my room. The moonlight spilling in through my window offered the only light. As my eyes fell on my open closet, that's when I saw it. Teeth. Long and sharp. The light from the moon danced off them as they formed a twisted grin. I closed my eyes, hoping this was a dream or I had just imagined it. As I opened my eyes, the teeth were still there and, worse, moving towards me. As my vision grew clearer, the teeth gave way to the rest of its face. Pale, rotten skin pulled taut in all the wrong places. Bloodshot eyes hovered above its mouth, unblinking, never averting its gaze from me. I tried to scream, but nothing came out. I tried to move, but I was paralyzed with fear. It was all I could do to close my eyes and pray this nightmare would end. I could hear the sound of shuffling across the floor, the same noise I had heard in the store. I opened my eyes again to find this abomination towering over me, and let out another soft laugh, its sharp teeth glistening, as it reached towards me with one long gnarled, pale hand. I did the only thing my addled mind could think of in that moment. I smiled. The creature's eyes softened, as if a wave of understanding washed over its face. Its toothy grin stretched even wider than humanly possible, and as I blinked, it was gone. The creature had completely vanished. Finally able to break my paralysis, I slammed the switch for my lamp, my eyes shooting around my bedroom and sweat dripping from my forehead. As my heart rate began to lower, I realized I was still smiling. I let my facial muscles relax and tried to catch my breath. That was when I heard it, a soft chuckle from outside my bedroom door. The shuffling noise began again, and a haunting realization overcame me. Oh my god, I have to keep smiling. My mouth stretched into a forced smile, and the noises outside my door immediately stopped. I didn't know what to do. How could I smile in my sleep? An idea suddenly popped into my head, and I raced towards the kitchen. Frantically, opening one of the drawers, I found the packing tape I had procured from work. Pulling off 2 pieces of tape, I affixed them to my face. I looked in the bathroom mirror, and sure enough, my mouth was pulled into a smile. I put it to the test and allowed my face to relax as much as it could. No noises. As I went back to bed, It was several long hours of silence before I was finally able to sleep. It's been 3 weeks since that night. Every day, the same routine, smiling all day long, and all night long with the help of packing tape. The nights are long, and every once in a while, I take a chance to dare not to smile, but like clockwork, I always hear it. That damn laugh. It's always there. He's always watching. I've been so stressed I even miss Christmas with my family. They probably think I'm even more of a loser than they did before. The guys at work won't hang out with me either. They think I'm some kind of freak trying to replace Kevin. Abby only talks to me when she has to, and I don't blame her. Things aren't all bad though. I made Employee of the Month for December. Just keep smiling. I'd been a flight attendant for 3 years, serving one of the most prestigious airlines in the world. The job was both physically and emotionally draining. We always had to look our best. Even throughout a 14-hour flight, I had to learn to deal with time differences and work through jet lags. The worst of all was continuing to pretend to be friendly and helpful to passengers who've been outright rude or made chauvinistic remarks towards me. I was first attracted to the job because of my love of traveling. In my 3 years, I've covered over 20 different countries, and I'm grateful to have seen so many wonderful sights. The job paid well too. I was able to afford luxury goods every once in a while, and pay off the housing loan for a condominium I share with my now husband. In spite of all the previous supernatural encounters, I've never once thought about leaving the job, up until a year ago. Our crew was on a 10-hour flight to London. I was assigned to serve in business class after passing my probation a few months ago. It definitely felt more relaxed, as compared to having the call bell ring every single minute and fulfilling every passenger's request or demand in economy class. There were only 9 passengers in business, and all they wanted to do since takeoff was sleep. After dinner service, we dimmed the lights in the cabin and returned back to the galley to reset. About 2 hours into my nap, the call button of seat 5A lit up. I quickly checked my grooming in the mirror before making my way out to assist the passenger. I heard low moans coming from the seat. As I went in for a closer look, I saw a young lady in her late 20s on the floor, squirming and tightly clutching onto a blanket. "Ma'am, are you alright? Do you need help getting back to your seat?" I asked, concerned. She seemed like she was in a lot of pain, and I tried helping her back into her seat, but she refused. Is there a doctor on board? I think I might be in labor," she panted. I stared at her in shock, finally realizing the puddle of water she was sitting in. Her water bag hadn't already broken. "Hang on, let me get some help," I stuttered, running back to the galley to look for my colleagues. I enlisted the help of my batchmate, Andrew, and senior stewardess, Julie. They both helped the lady in 5A to first class, where there were no passengers, and attended to her whilst I informed the pilot of the situation. I made an announcement to call over any doctors or midwives who could be of assistance on board. My heart was racing so quickly, because I sure as heck wasn't ready to deliver a baby on board. Thankfully, our call for assistance was answered by a midwife from Australia. She was a plump, bright-eyed lady who looked to be in her 50s, and she remained as calm as a cucumber when I escorted her to first class. When I got there, I was shocked by how much the lady was bleeding. She'd soaked up the flight blanket and all 5 full-size bath towels. Her face was all red, angrily moaning and trying to get the baby out. The midwife asked how far along she was, and she answered, 28 weeks. All 3 of us were briefed on the birth plan. Julie would be staying with the midwife and the lady in 5A, as she was the only one with prior training on assisting with births on board. Andrew and I were to assist from the outside, and continue attending to the business class passengers who might have been alarmed by my initial call for assistance. An hour passed, and we could still hear the low moans and panting. The midwife continued encouraging the lady to push and to not give up. In between the pushes, I could hear how the lady was muttering, "It's not time yet," or "It's not going to turn out right." We heard the midwife shouting, "Give one last big push," followed by a scream, and then crying. After 10 seconds of contemplating, Andrew and I burst into the first class cabin. We found Julie sitting on the floor, facing us. her hands covered in blood and her eyes in shock. And the midwife, she was quivering in fear, her mouth seemingly muttering, "It can't be." The lady in 5A, she was sobbing. As we went in for a closer look, I caught a glimpse of her baby, only it wasn't a baby. Wrapped up in one of our flight blankets was a tiny baby with grayish blue skin, piercing green eyes, and fingers that looked strangely like claws. I couldn't believe my eyes. What was I looking at? It seemed like a monster, or could it be a stillborn? When I saw it, it was breathing. After recovering from my state of shock, I tapped on the lady's shoulder and asked, "Ma'am, are you okay?" She looked at me with her big green eyes and frowned. "It didn't come out right. It didn't." Now I know where the baby's piercing green eyes came from. What do you mean by it didn't come out right? The pilot says that we'll be landing in another hour for you to get to a hospital. Would that be alright for you? Her green eyes flashed. Something in her snapped, and her face had completely changed. She grabbed my collar with her left hand and stared deep into my eyes, whispering, "I don't need a hospital, and all of you, I'll make sure you pay for it. You will." Andrew quickly diffused the situation by taking me back to the galley to calm down. 2 other flight attendants from economy came over to help with the cleaning up, escorted the midwife back to her seat, and prepared the lady and her baby for landing. I never got to see either of them again. I took a 3 weeks leave after the incident to properly recuperate. Those bloodstains were still in the collar of my uniform. No matter how much scrubbing I've done or what detergent I've tried, it just refuses to budge. I just left the uniform hanging in my closet and went ahead to get a new set of uniform custom made, all while thinking I was going to be back on the job after my break. I found out I was pregnant on my husband's birthday. He was overjoyed, but thrilled wouldn't be the exact word I'd use to describe my initial emotions. I started getting nightmares of me having an ectopic pregnancy, or a phantom pregnancy, and even giving birth to a stillborn. I was living my life in anxiety, even though the ultrasound scans showed that the baby was healthy and growing well. I couldn't take the thought of being back in the metal tube after that incident had happened, so I threw in my resignation letter, but I didn't feel more relaxed. I wasn't happier. I am now 26 weeks pregnant. A previous obstetrician had left the hospital to start her own practice. We would have loved to continue seeing her, but unfortunately our medical insurance doesn't cover anything outside of local and private hospitals. We were referred to another one, Dr. Ariel, who had freshly graduated from medical school. She had long, wavy brown hair and green eyes. I dreaded every appointment with her because her green eyes would remind me of that incident. Sometimes I would catch her staring weirdly at the ultrasound, or even at me. I wondered if there was anything wrong with our baby, but my husband would just say that I was overthinking it. For my 26-week follow-up, my husband couldn't make it because he was going to be away on a business trip. I went alone to visit Dr. Ariel, and it was unsettling. After completing our routine scans and tests, she asked me, "Anything abnormal with the pregnancy so far?" I suddenly recalled how inactive my baby's been the past few days. I would usually feel it kick and turn multiple times each day, but recently it's been rather absent. I told Dr. Ariel about it and she laughed. "Don't worry, it's going to turn out right this time." She stared at me with her piercing green eyes as she walked me out of her office. Those green eyes. It seems as though I've seen them somewhere. Not gonna lie, I took one look at the scene and vomited all over my uniform. From what I could tell, among my fellow officers, my reaction was the most extreme, but it was evident in their postures, hushed breaths, and bleak expressions that they were all equally disgusted in their own ways. Eventually though, my mind and stomach caught up to reality, and I was able to look at the spectacle in all its glory. On top of a tree trunk near the Robbinswood Park playground, just a few feet from the swing set, rested a completely intact human brain. Detective Kenzie, who had been first on the scene, shuffled over to me. "Just like our caller said," he muttered, shaking his head. "Jesus, man." Sergeant Matthews, whose shoes were sprayed a little by my breakfast, chimed in. It doesn't look like it's been out here long. It's still pink. At least in the grooves. Just in time for the kiddos to get out of school. Officer Jordan chuckled grimly. So what now? Kenzie asked. Paramedics? It's outside the body, son, Matthews replied. We paused there for a second as everything sunk in. Rain had started to sprinkle, and with it, a red stream trickled down the side of the tree stump. Fuck. Kenzie held his arm over his mouth. The thing's bleeding. I remembered something from high school biology. That's not blood. I corrected through sour breath. That's CSF, cerebrospinal fluid. Looks like it didn't drain all the way before getting put there. Handled pretty carefully then, Jordan added. Yeah, or just really fresh. Forensics arrived shortly thereafter, and we were more than happy to let them get on with their work. Naturally, I was put on the case along with Kenzie, who was my partner at the time. Though we didn't make a whole lot of headway in the following few days, we were able to extract some information from the crime scene photos. The brain on top wasn't the only weird thing about the tree stump. Upon closer examination, it was covered in shallow, unnatural scratches. I'd like to say they formed symbols, but they were so tightly packed into the surface that they were pretty undefined. The markings bled into each other, forming a network of lines, circles, and odd geometrical patterns. Even with Google's help, we couldn't determine what any of them meant. They were just indecipherable. Kenzie and I were way over our heads. After work, we'd go for drinks and inevitably wax philosophical about the whole thing. Our discussions always started out about our families, or the neighborhood, or other cases, but they all inevitably came back to the brain. I can't remember all of them, but the one from last night is still pretty fresh in my mind. Kenzie had downed a little whiskey, and I was finishing off the second of 5 beers I'd have that night. Listen, I know we've beat this thing like a dead horse, he started, but can we just sit back for a second and admire the whole brain situation? What's there to admire? I asked. Kenzie leaned forward. There hasn't been a murder around here for the past, what, 2 years? No missing persons, no kidnappings. I mean, yeah, a few assaults here and there, but that's just natural. And then he laughed nervously. Like, when I wanted to become a cop, I wasn't exactly expecting to see the pretty side of town, but you gotta admit, there's almost a cosmic air about it. Like, things have just been going too well here, and some things come along to compensate. I mean, there are sickos out there, you know. But this is unholy. Like, actually unholy. I think you're reading too much into it. Maybe, but what else can I do? Kenzie flagged the bartender and got another glass of whiskey. He gulped it down in barely a second. He turned to me then, a weird expression on his face that I couldn't quite pin down. You ever feel, like, when you see it in the photos and stuff, like it's just... He turned away and cut himself off. Not familiar, but I don't know, something close to it? I made a mental note to cut him off from the whiskey and tried to decipher his question. You mean about the brain? I replied. I don't know, man. It's just a weird thing. Like, you know when you see someone you knew as a kid and you just barely recognize them? Uh-huh. He folded his arms, obviously struggling to collect his thoughts. Maybe I've been looking at the pictures too much. I just can't shake this kind of crawly feeling it gives me. Well, it's a disembodied brain, dude. Kenzie grinned. Forget it, man. It's stupid. I feel stupid for bringing it up. I don't mean to cut you off or trivialize it. It just hits me differently is all. Like, obviously it's gory and the symbols around it are fucking bizarre. But it's like serial killer crazy. I'd even say it's tamer than some of like Bundy's messed up stuff. That's not saying much. I seriously think we're gonna find a crazy, but perfectly ordinary guy at the end of this who's done this kind of thing all over the country. Kenzie pointed at me, glass in hand. The no-brainer, he announced dramatically. I laughed. Jesus, dude. That's what they'll call him, man. Too soon. It's a good serial killer name though, right? I mean, yeah. I took a swig from my third bottle. Yeah, it's got a ring to it. That's for sure. Forensics arranged a meeting at 9 a.m. today with our entire department. I grabbed a donut before taking a seat next to Kenzie, who was visibly drained from last night. Jordan joined us shortly thereafter, half a donut in his mouth. "Hey," he muffled, "either of you know what this is about?" "The only thing it could be about," Kenzie replied. "I mean, I assume. I think they found the guy." "Let's hope." Jordan perked up a little and pointed to the door. Sergeant Matthews had just entered the room. I think that was the first time I'd ever seen Matthews visibly shaken. As much as he tried to force a calm demeanor, there was no hiding his red eyes and shaking hands. Jordan sighed. "Well, that's not a good sign. Wonder if they found another one," I muttered. A woman I'd never seen at the station before followed Matthews in, but halted before stepping through the doorway. She had a clean suit on, and an overall aloof demeanor. Her look just screamed federal agent. I also could have sworn she glanced at us right before stopping. With an oddly neutral voice, the woman hollered over to Matthews, who paced back over to her with unusual urgency. The two leaned toward each other and exchanged a few words before Matthews looked over at us. I was able to make out Matthews telling the suit, "I'm sorry, I'll take care of it," before turning over to Jordan, Kenzie, and I. "Detective Kenzie," Matthews beckoned. "This is Agent Laubowitz. Would you mind following her out for a second?" Kenzie gave me a confused look and rose steadily from his seat. "Sure. Am I in trouble?" he asked. "No, you're not in trouble," Leibowitz replied. "We just need your help with some records." Bullshit. Kenzie knew it too, but he followed Leibowitz out of the conference room anyway. He gave me one last concerned glance before Matthews closed the door behind him. The meeting began shortly thereafter. A forensics department's guy, Yu, came in and stood at the front of the room, noticeably jittering his hands. "Morning, everyone," he muttered. "Sorry for such an early meeting, but we got word from up top to take care of this as soon as possible. For the few guys here that don't know me, I'm Harold Yu. I work in forensics downstairs. Of course, most recently, I've been busy on our Robbinswood case. Now, as your fellow officers can tell you, we haven't been making much progress figuring out how anyone could have done this, since we didn't have a body or any other physical clues to accompany the brain. We moved pretty much quickly into DNA analysis. The test found 2 distinct signatures on the brain, so one for a killer and one for a victim. Then we tried to find a match for either of them, though we couldn't find any. Not from missing persons or criminal records or anything. So after we ran through those local records, we started looking statewide. Again, no luck. We were trying to figure out what to do with our brain dough when one of our seniors had the idea to run it through the officer database. He thought this could be a gang-related thing, maybe like a warning. Wanted to check if any state patrol recently went missing on duty. To cut to the chase, we found a match. The door creaked open, and I noticed Leibowitz re-enter the room. Seeing her sent a cold twinge running down my back, and I realized something was very, very wrong. Wait, Jordan blurted. "You think Kenzie did it?" "You don't understand. No, he wouldn't cut a guy's brain out. Are you kidding me?" "Hey," Matthews hollered. "Son, not the time." Jordan's leg was shaking so bad I could feel the ground next to him vibrate. He gave an offended grunt and folded his arms as Yu continued. "You don't understand me," Yu continued. Now obviously our gut reaction was to investigate Kenzie as a suspect, but we had kind of a nagging suspicion. We collected more samples, this time tissue from the inside of the cortex. From the brain cells themselves, the samples all matched only one of the DNA strains from our initial test. Evidently, it was also the one we matched to Kenzie. My stomach nearly jumped up my throat. "Wait," Jordan interrupted again. "What do you mean?" "He means it's Kenzie's brain, son," Matthews rasped. "He's in the other room," Jordan shouted. "He was sitting right here. What do you mean it's his?" "Listen," Yu tried to calm Jordan down. "We checked these tests to death. We dumped hours into this, and honestly still didn't believe it until we found something else." Yu reached into his bag by his side and pulled out some papers. About a year ago, Kenzie had surgery to mitigate his seizures, he explained. Corpus callosum surgery. A little chunk of the nerves connecting the two halves of his head got removed. He slid a brain scan from a thick folder and held it up. We checked our brain. Exactly the same region had been removed. Not roughly. Exactly. The room was still. Jordan's face was as indignant as before, but now completely frozen. I myself felt ready to throw up. Matthew's gaze was firmly fixed on the floor. Even you seemed suddenly sobered, setting Kenzie's scan back on the desk face down. Eventually, a set of slow footsteps broke the silence. Leibowitz calmly and steadily walked up to the front of the room and cleared her throat. "I understand this must be confusing," she announced. "Unfortunately, this is about as much information as we can afford you. Kenzie will remain here until we escort him to a safer location, for his own protection. As for you all, the case is no longer within your jurisdiction. We'll be confiscating all evidence, records, and documents relating to this case, and expect you to help us keep it within the walls of this station." She turned to the door and motioned the other two agents in, both of whom carried large briefcases. "We appreciate all the work you've done so far." Leibowitz thanked us flatly before strolling out of the room. The next few hours in that conference room were a complete flurry. Papers packed full of legalese were shoved in my face, and I was forced to sign every last one. Words like forbidden, incident, penalty, and discretion danced before my eyes in contexts I'd never seen before. People in suits entered and left the station, some waving badges that didn't belong to any organization I recognized. Instinctively though, I knew these badges carried authority far above mine. Not everyone was compliant at first. Jordan outright refused to sign anything that was put in front of him, but after he was briefly taken outside by agents for a word, he kept his head down and flew through the forms. As I write this from my phone, we have Kenzie under observation still, tucked away in the most inferior room of our station. Evidently it's taken the agents a little longer to escort him than expected, but it's probably only a matter of time before he's whisked away. Until then, none of us are allowed in or out of the station. Oddly enough though, they didn't guard the surveillance room very well. I snuck in when they weren't looking. It was pretty easy to find which screen was for Kenzie's room, but not because I could spot Kenzie. It's because all the cameras were working except for just one. A small monitor in the middle that was completely black, and the sound coming from it was nothing but muffled sloshing and the faint chirping of birds. I was born on a snowy December day, and not much was strange about my birth, except for the day. I was born on Christmas, the greatest gift my parents ever received, to hear my dad tell it. But that wasn't the case for the rest of the town, because from the moment I came out, I was ostracized. I was put in a different ward than the other babies, and no nurse really wanted to look after me, which my dad caused more than one fight with the staff over. But I don't really blame them. The town was one of the most religious in the country, had more churches than stores, and that made them superstitious. When I was brought home, the family dog wouldn't go near me. In fact, the poor thing would cower in the corner any time I was in the same room. He died when I was 3. Dad said he was just old, but I'm not too sure about that. I think he died because of me. We never got another pet, which I hated because I love animals. They just don't love me back. I never saw much of my extended family. Even both my grandparents wouldn't travel across town to come see me. My birthdays were just my parents, and while everyone else was out with family and friends, we stayed holed up in our little house. Those were some of my favorite memories. Those Christmases and birthdays when I was little. I ate lots of good food that my parents brought me, and had the attic all to myself on Christmas night. When school started, things got worse. I wasn't bullied or made fun of. I was just kept at a distance. No one talked to me. No one paid any attention to me other than to give a dirty look. I quickly felt like a ghost in the hallways and could miss classes without issue, because I think my teachers were relieved when I didn't show up. I don't blame them either, but it wasn't my fault. I didn't choose to be born on the 25th. It's just the way it worked out. I made my first real friend when I was 13. My mom had gone into the drugstore to pick up some prescriptions. I wasn't allowed inside. The owner hated me and made it very clear that I wasn't ever to come in. The alleyway between the drugstore and the lawyer's office became my playground. It had been snowing since earlier that morning, and the alley was like a winter wonderland. I made snowballs and did some target practicing using an old painted sign that hung on the side of the lawyer's office. It advertised some junk food with a goofy looking boy in the corner. My best shot hit the boy right between the eyes, and I gave a hearty laugh. Nice shot. A voice called, and I turned to see a girl bundled up in a heavy maroon jacket that reached down to her knees and a green scarf. She had a red knitted hat on, and pulled down so that all I could see of her face was her eyes and rosy nose. Her eyes squinted at me in a smile. "You play baseball? You have a good arm." "No," I said, and looked around the rest of the alley, worried that someone would see us. "Can I do something for you?" She shrugged and bent down to make a snowball of her own. "I'm just bored," she said, and tossed the snowball. It hit just below mine. I hate coming here. "Where?" "To my grandpa's," she said with a nod toward the drugstore. "He's so boring, and he and my dad just want to drink. Don't get me started on the boys here." Her brows went down, and her eyes two slits. "Jerks won't let me play in their snowball fight 'cause I'm a girl." "Don't know if it's because of that," I said. She canted her head at me. "They don't let me play either." "Why not? Like I said, you can throw pretty good. If you lived around here, you'd know why," I said, and tossed another snowball. "You murder someone?" she asked and pulled down her scarf so her voice wasn't muffled. "'Cause if so, I know a few others you can do the same to." "Nope, never killed anyone. Thought about it, but never got around to it." She laughed a little, and her breath came out in a white cloud. "That's too bad. What's your name?" "Gregory," I said, and turned to face her. "You?" "Charlotte," she said with her hand, and we shook. "What do you do for fun around here?" "Mostly just hang out at home, to be honest." "Boring," she said, and spun on her heel. She went over to a trash can and brushed away the snow on the lid before sitting down. "You can't be staying inside all the time, can you? I'd go nuts." I shrugged. "Not very popular around here. You probably shouldn't even be talking to me. They'll start hating you too." "Oh no, a bunch of bumpkins won't like me. Whatever should I do?" she said and laughed. It was the most I had ever heard someone laugh around me. "They can all go gurgle sewer water for all I care. Doesn't seem to be anything wrong with you either, so I could even care less about their opinion." "Thanks, I guess." My mom called, and I turned to see her at the mouth of the alley. She had 2 bags in hand and just stared at me as if Charlotte wasn't there. "What are you doing?" "Talking," I said. "Okay, well, I got what I needed, so come on. Time to head home," she said and walked off. I turned to Charlotte. "Sorry, gotta go." "No worries. You live around here? We should go do something, like skating or something. I'm gonna go crazy if I have to hang out by myself anymore." "Yeah," I said, and she walked with me to the end of the alley. I pointed down the street. "Go 2 blocks down, make a right on Merchant, and my house is the 5th up on the left. It has green siding and my dad is putting up a ton of lights. You can't miss it." She grinned. "Great. Maybe tomorrow?" "Sure," I said, and hurried to catch up to my mom. Charlotte stayed for the week of Christmas, and that week was one of the best weeks of my life. We skated on the pond, though we were only allowed a small portion of it until most of the kids went home. We had snowball fights and explored the creek and forest around the town. Things could not have been better until she wanted me to come out on Christmas night. My parents were against it from the moment I said anything. "You can't," my mom said. She was at the sink, cleaning up after Christmas dinner. Dad sat at the table, finishing his wine. "Why not? She goes back home tomorrow, and we just want to play some more. Your mom is right. You can't go out tonight, Gregory." He stood slowly and removed a key from his pocket. It was an old iron key that fit the lock for the attic. He frowned as he stared at it. "You know why?" "It's not fair," I said, and looked between the 2 of them. "I finally make a friend, and I can't even see them before they leave." "We're sorry," my mom said as the plates clanged into the sink. Her shoulders were up, and she took a deep, shuddering breath. "But you can't." "This is bullcrap," I said, and both of them stared at me with wide eyes. I stomped out of the room. I wish I was never born. I went to the attic before they came to get me. Night had fallen heavy over the house by the time Dad had his flashlight out and climbed the stairs. He followed the beam of light in and stopped at the top of the stairs. I could see in the reflective light that he had a sad look on his face, which for some reason hurt more than not being allowed to go. "All set?" he asked. I adjusted the collar around my neck. The weight of the metal was biting into my collarbone. I then lifted up the chain and held the collar up. He nodded and came over to me. He put the lock in the collar and turned the key. He then bent down and hugged me. "I really am sorry, Gregory. Maybe you can visit her in the summer. I wouldn't mind making the drive wherever she is." "Okay," I said, still angry. But there was no point in arguing. He got up, patted my head, and saw my mom at the stairs. She gave a tiny wave, but didn't come into the attic. She never could. I just stared at her until she turned and went down the stairs, followed by my dad. The attic door squeaked shut, and the sound of the lock clicking closed echoed in the chill. I leaned back against the wall and stared at the ceiling, waiting. When it happened, it wasn't a surprise. 5 years of it happening had trained me well on what to expect, and soon I was able to move around the attic freely. Well, at least the length of the chain on the wall. I smelled her before I heard her. We had hugged a number of times, and the scent of her shampoo and just her was embedded in my senses. The doorbell rang, a sound that made my ears hurt, and I covered them with my arms. I could hear voices, my dad talking to Charlotte. Soon after, I heard her climbing the side of the house, breathing heavily and cursing all the way. I snorted at the thought of her trying to check on me. I didn't think any excuse would get Charlotte to leave without seeing me. I made my way to the circular window, pressed my nose against the glass, and shivered at the cold. Snow fell heavily outside, and I could smell people walking along the road. A gnawing hunger rose in the pit of my stomach, and I licked my lips at the thought of what a meal they would make. I heard a clang of metal outside, and couldn't see the cause anywhere. Charlotte's face appeared at the circular window, and it startled me. I gave a barking yelp and backed away, my long nails scraping against the floorboards. She stared through the fogged-up glass, her eyes wide. I backed away to the shadows as she gave a wide grin and pushed on the glass. It opened with a blow of snow, and cold, and it rippled through my hair. "This what they meant?" she asked as she stuck her head in. She slowly pulled herself the rest of the way and stood before the glass. The familiar hunger rose up, but I stomped it back down, using my surprise to keep myself distracted. I thought they were insane, but it's true. I couldn't say anything. My mouth wasn't working, and my tongue could only hang outside of my mouth. The grin she wore grew as she found a stool in the corner and sat down on it. "You're a werewolf." My entire body jerked at the word. My parents never used it. Only people in town would use it in whispers as I passed. It was an insult to me, and Charlotte seemed to pick up on it and rose her hands in a pulsating gesture. "Sorry, I didn't mean anything by it. You gonna eat me?" The hunger was there, and growing, but I shook my head. She went to stand, but I dropped to all fours and stalked around her, staying out of the moonlight that poured from the windows. I knew I shouldn't have come, but I had to know. The kids around here, they talk about you like you were a devil or cursed by Jesus himself. I'd heard about you for years, but never got a chance to meet you. Can you even talk? "Hard," I said. The word came out as if I had stuffed my mouth with sand. Never had anyone to talk to? Not even your parents?" she asked, and I shook my head. Her eyes narrowed, and the smile disappeared. "Sorry, but do you eat people?" I shrugged. I never had before, but the desire was there in that hunger. The same desire I felt with her sitting there. I wanted to rip her throat out, and yet the idea caused such a well of pain inside that it stopped me. She stood slowly, her hands out as she crossed the distance to me. She looked at the chain and collar with disgust, and then held her hand out as if to pet me. I moved forward and let her. The blade sunk deep before I reacted. The pain came in a searing wave, and I jerked back, tearing fur from my head where she had grasped. My right arm wouldn't move easily as the blade had slipped between the joint. I used my legs to leap away from her, and stared in disbelief as she ducked her hand into her jacket again. The blade she pulled out looked far too long, and almost like a surface of water, with how it shimmered in the moonlight. "Quicker than I expected," she said in a tired voice that didn't fit the softness in her features. "Pa said you're like where, but I didn't really understand." I growled at her, while I tried my best to make sense of what was happening. She seemed to notice my confusion and grinned, the devil in her face. Come on, I'm not that good of an actor, she said, and flipped the knife in her hand. Or did you really believe that I was your friend? There are no friends of werewolves, Greg. Your parents should have snuffed you out at the first sign of the change. Who? I'm just Charlotte. Well, maybe I'm a bit more. She walked smoothly around me, moving like someone far older. I'm a hunter. You are to be my first prey. Grandpa had been watching you for years. He's the one that chose you for my first kill. You should feel honored. I know I do. I growled again and snapped at her. She jerked only slightly and recovered after only a moment. She chuckled. The collar almost feels like cheating. Come over, I'll take it off for you. She knelt down and motioned her hand like one would do to call an unknown dog. I jumped at her, the hunger and betrayal mixing into a kind of terrible anger. She darted back, the claws of my left hand just coming up short. She backed toward the door as my chain didn't let me go that far. She frowned and flipped the blade again. She then threw it at me. I just barely dodged it, and the tip embedded itself into the wood of the floor with a thud and twang. I had thought that only happened in TV shows. My anger rose, and I started to pull at the chain. I knew it was weak as I had torn it partly out of the wood last year, and being afraid of getting in trouble, I put it back into the post the best I could before Dad came to release me. The nails screamed from the wood as I pulled with all my strength, and finally they broke free. I tumbled across the floor and slammed into the wall beside her. She took her chance, a new blade in her hand, but I was up on my feet faster than she expected. I swung and hit her mid-body with my left hand. She went flying across the room and hit the post I had once been chained to. She dropped with a cloud of dust and a round of coughs as she struggled to get to her feet. A faint laugh escaped her. There we go, now things are getting interesting. She staggered to her feet. There was a cut on her forehead that bled down into her right eye. She wiped at it and then charged me. She had practiced fighting my kind. I had never been in a real fight in my life. It was only instinct and luck that kept her blade from finding purchase. In only moments, I was covered in 100 stinging cuts. I was breathing heavily while she stood back and looked like she had only jogged down the street. Just die already. Do everyone a favor. You're going to kill someone. Maybe your parents. Maybe you'll break out one night and eat some poor woman. It's going to happen, so just die before it does. I had considered her words many times since I had started to change, but I couldn't agree with them. My parents loved me and would be heartbroken if I died. She was right though. I would kill at some point, and I wanted her to be my first kill too. I dove at her, the cold air feeling like pins in the cuts across my face and shoulders. She tried to dodge out of the way, but I landed short and pushed off again to catch her. She screamed as I knocked her to the ground and clamped my mouth around her face. It was over in a sickening crunch and a gurgle. I ate that night, ate until the sun was up, and I transformed back to my normal self. Charlotte's body laid just gore in a square of sunlight. I was covered in her blood, and my mom screamed when she came with my dad to release me. Everything changed then. That hunger that only came out during the change was now with me at all times, and when Christmas came, the hunger was unbearable. We had moved a few towns over from Charlotte's death, and the attic of the new house wasn't nearly as good as the house before. I escaped and killed my parents when I was 16, and have been traveling ever since. I can't lock myself up anymore on Christmas. It doesn't work. So I try to stay as far away from people during that time as I can, but the wolf has other ideas. Somehow I can travel miles and miles to find a meal, so a warning to all of you. If you hear a noise downstairs on Christmas, don't assume it's Santa. It could be one of my kind. It could be me. And you could be my next Christmas dinner.